I decided to go for the icebreaker because Luigi opened one question that I'm actually implemented in the tool that we are developing as the Mesoc Toolkit. And I'm going to talk about Mesoc Toolkit today, which is one of the main deliverables of this project. So what is Mesoc Toolkit? Mesoc Toolkit is actually tool which firstly solves the task of georeference visualization of Mesoc related documents, which can either be pilot or scientific studies, and enables this visualization in the Mesoc matrix. I will show example in a minute. Then it is also analytical tool which enables upload and automatic analysis of user documents. And when I say documents, I mean text explaining cultural and art policies which are described in these documents. So as the analytical tool, user will be able to upload document, and then document will be automatically analyzed with possible suggestion of possible transition variables and impacts. And also, why I volunteer to be the first, also I actually planned to do the explanation how this variable was inferred, because to the user is not just to give you answer 42, but also to explain why this 42 is really important to your problem. And finally, Mesoc Toolkit is also a semantic search tool, which actually is capable of the information retrieval of top documents, either related to the content, either related to the similar inferred variables. So what are we doing here? In short, we are starting from documents, and with a lot of artificial intelligence NLP techniques, we are building a business intelligence dashboard which organizes and measures the data which was expressed in the documents in the Mesoc Toolkit. So actually, we are using the high-level management perspective where somebody can analyze the data in the big picture. So this toolkit will be capable of monitoring the big picture. I will skip to this slide. So here we have the Mesoc matrix. Mesoc matrix is organizing Mesoc knowledge into 30 cells of the matrix. So here we have health and well-being, urban renovation, and so on. And document will be automatically nested into the cells of the matrix which are relevant or which are categories of this document. Then we will also try to infer variables which can be of significance to this document automatically. And then the user can search for the similar documents having the similar content, or to the documents that have the similar variables used for the measurement of the transition process. And finally, now to the explainability part, user will also have access to some semantic structure, which will be ontology or knowledge graph or some taxonomy, which is then linking this document to this semantic structure will provide explanation why this variable was found relevant for this specific policy. And when I talk about ontology, I here used, was motivated by a paper by Annalisa Cicerchia, which probably is going to be the next speaker. So what I mean that we are actually having some ontology or knowledge graph linking with different indicators or variables. And by this structure, we will be able to provide explanation why a system suggested this as to be important factor to monitor in this process. So what I'm using, maybe I will skip this part because this is technical part, and I will go to this slide. So currently we are using, so this is all artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence now has a very lucrative new field, which is called deep learning. So at the moment, we are not using any deep learning technique because we don't have enough data to train the models. But in the later stages, we are planning to learn the deep learning language model, which I call MESOC-BERT. And then this BERT model can be trained for different tasks as classification into the MESOC matrix or information extraction. And more important, it can be also trained to automatically do this variable extraction thing. And this is open problem because variable extraction is actually knowledge extraction problem and knowledge which is highly expert and highly abstract. So here maybe some knowledge graph extraction and completion procedures can be at place, and this is going to be extremely challenging because at the moment we don't have variables annotated in the data, so we are actually doing this in the unsupervised manner without any firm annotations. So to wrap up, at the MESOC projects as the open research questions, I see three main things. First is the automatic inference of MESOC variables, but in the unsupervised manner currently, which is extremely challenging. Then also automatic extraction and maybe completion of semantic structure when I would like to go into the MESOC knowledge graph extraction and maybe ontology extraction. So this is kind of capturing the, or kind of externalization of the general mental model, which is captured in the knowledge graph. And finally, when we manage to link all these parts together, then the explanation of the extracted MESOC variables or structure, semantic structure, would also ask to generate some explanation, which means that this is the text generation problem from the MESOC ontology. So this is the three open research problems that I see at the moment in the project. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for staying within the 5 minutes. I can announce that we will be back on these problems that you mentioned in the second round. So now I would like to ask who is going to be the next, who feels like being the next. Otherwise, like at school, I will start. Oh, Jesse Marsh. Jesse Marsh from the Atelier studio in Palermo, is also a member of the advisory board of MESOC, and he is sort of one of the fathers of the concept behind which was left implicit for reasons of time by Sanda's presentation, and the concept is about finding for regularities or recurrent elements of transition, to quote the morning's discussion, within documents related to cultural policies and practices. But I think that Jesse will surprise us, and maybe he can also add some comments to what Pierluigi Sacco said in his keynote. The floor is yours. If you have slides, please share your screen.
Yeah, we'll get to them, I guess. Thank you, and thank you to the MESOC project for this invitation in this very stimulating context between the two speeches of Mr. Sacco and Mr. Lorbach this morning, and I'd like to try to connect them. Supposing for a moment, because until now it sounds to me like you're treating AI and culture and society as different objects. And I think what it would help if we were for a moment to consider them as objects that are totally interpenetrated, namely that society, as Mr. Sacco was actually suggesting towards the end, that society will be driven by culture and by AI. So if we're talking about AI measuring impacts, it will be measuring itself, which would be an interesting twist on things. But framing this in the discourse of this morning from Mr. Lorbach, in the sense that we are all trying to transition from one state to another, from one state which he was calling, I think, stable or a conservative framework, where the where the role of predictions becomes a little more complicated, because what we are going to need to predict is the unexpected, in fact. He was talking about the typical solutions that are familiar to us, and how in the future scenarios of, we could say, a circular economy, to make a long story short, a lot of these assumptions are going to be turned upside down. So then the question is, what is the role of culture? And I would say creativity, because culture is perhaps the more stable side of things, and creativity is more about the unexpected. And I tend to like that part more. What is going to be the role of this in helping us in this transition, or maybe making that transition more difficult, representing the conservative side, or the side that is open to identifying weak signals, seeing the little things that are going on, and helping them to take shape and stabilize. And then it would be interesting to situate the MESOC activity and framework on that. Now, taking from some work I've been doing in the area of manufacturing, I think you can all see this. Just a couple of slides. This is, by the way, this slide comes from Seaman and Industry 4.0, and talking all about artificial intelligence. And here you see product design is separate from the production, from the objects, from the whole process. We have a linear societal process of producing stuff, and design is just sort of ghettoized as a moment at the beginning of that. That's the only time that culture comes into the thing, and the rest is all prediction, we could say. It's all moving things around. It's all adapting, and so on and so forth. This is a well-known scheme of the circular economy, where you see the path that things take is unknown. You may have a shirt that was produced in some place, and you may repair it. You may recycle it. You may turn it into a bag. You may take that fabric and turn it to insulation in a building. And each one of those branches from the expected destiny of your shirt to the new destiny of your shirt is a moment of design. It's a moment of looking at options. It's a moment of thinking creatively about those options. And it's a moment of deciding which path to take. And AI can be very helpful in that process, I would say, but we have to be careful about bias. And here the question is it, we can talk about explainable AI, but is AI ever going to be explainable? It probably will not. Let's assume AI is never going to be able to be explainable. Let's assume that AI is like, this is a map of cultural types. I don't know whether you can read it, where you basically have, you know, the Mediterranean creative type of creativity, or you have the cool, factual, decisive type of creativity that you get in Northern Europe, and so on and so forth. So there are different biases. Are biases necessarily a bad thing? Or do biases interacting with each other help us to be open to new solutions? To what degree do we explain ourselves to each other? And here we would need to get into all sorts of anthropological questions about the degree to which culture explains itself. And here finally, this is a very, I don't really like this diagram. It's a little reductive in terms of what design does, but it helps us here because it shows this double diamond where we're first exploring possibilities, okay? And then we're making choices and reducing the options. And then we're exploring, and then we're reducing. There's a tendency in technology research to think that our main goal is automation, namely substituting humans, because of old industrial logics where automation led to lower costs. But actually what we need to better understand are what are the choices. We need to have AI help us on the expanding side of this triangle, to help us look for new possible choices, not to make the choices. We need to make the choices. Whereas I think the big debate going on now, particularly in the Commission for what they're calling a human AI, is an AI that can dialogue with people, identify unexpected possibilities, not unexpected results, identify things that might be interesting, and then we can look into them, interpreting those from our different cultural standpoints. Now, is my 5 minutes up? Probably. If not, I'll give it back to Francesco.
We can just...
Am I still sharing my screen?
Yeah, you are. We can just leave the stone in the pond and see whether the waves...
A couple of rocks. A couple of rocks for you.
So who is going to be the next?
Can I go for it, Francesco?
Go, Giuseppe. Giuseppe Rizzo is a researcher at the Links Foundation in Turin, a private research foundation with several interests, including artificial intelligence. And since I don't know what you are going to talk about, I will shut up. Go, Giuseppe, please.
Thank you, Francesco. Thanks, everybody, for this invitation. I want to start from Jesse's point about performing an AI or creating an AI that can make better humans. And this is in line with our vision that says AI can bring more evidences, reason further, help us to make more aware choices, and overall improve the life of all species on this planet. But so let's now go back to how we plan to do it. And for doing that, I want to start from the concept of AI, which is one revolving concept published in 2010 from Russell and Norwig, considered the fathers of, among the fathers of AI. And the AI at the end is the study of agents, softwares, in other words, that receive percepts from the environment and perform actions. So having said that, we know the expectations that everybody of us has about AI. Every time we think about AI, we think about something that can bring us into a new world, or even make us the people who can become smarter. Well, let's frame this concept first, because this is a long path to be reached. So let's start from the evidences. And the evidences are the forecast about the impact that AI can bring. And this is a study brought by McKinsey that was published in 2018. It says AI will bring $30 trillion of value, boosting the global GDP by about 1.2%. This is a big number. So think about and frame what this really means. Because this really means, because at the end, since the last 20 years, we were accounted to utilize analytic techniques of any sort, because we are, let's say, we were actually quite used to create databases, store information. But now that the moment is bringing those databases to be exploited by those software that can make something, and we will see what. But just to give an idea of the value that can bring to, for instance, the travel sector is 128% compared to normal and traditional analytic techniques. And even if we glance quickly at this list, we can see agriculture because of the precision farming, and of course all the other fields such as transport, logistics, retail, and so on and so forth. So it says that by 2030, 70% of industries will adopt AI solutions, more than the analytic techniques that we are used to. So what about the other industries? The 30% that was not included in the study published by McKinsey & Company in 2018. Well, as of now, so 3 years after that study, it's hard to think that we won't see an industry impacted by AI. And just to give you an idea, this is a project where we are working along with some of the people participating to the MESOC project. It's about enabling immigrants to easily know and exercise their rights. So it's a different story than travel, right? We're sort of thinking about the travel as a sort of commodity where we can apply AI. But then we think about social inclusion, it's kind of, wow. So this is a different field. Well, AI can make an impact, but let's see how. So the challenge is, we know that immigrant, when he or she arrives to a new country, seeks for knowledge. And the knowledge is a very broad concept. Well, at the end, the sort of knowledge that she seeks is comprehensible, something that can understand and can turn into actions for her, for him. Well, what we are developing for addressing this challenge is a tool, a software, which is AI-based, that generates easy instructions starting from a bulk of documents. So for instance, think about the asylum request, very long procedures described in Bibles. Well, at the end of the day, a migrant needs to know the different steps to accomplish, and for each step, a few information, such as what is about the step, where to exercise the rights, when to go, and how the procedure is composed, or eventually the documents. So at the end of the day, well, actually still an ongoing project, but if I should take a picture as of now of the project, I can see that AI can simplify bureaucracy by addressing this pillar, which is, verbose and complex procedures. And simplifying bureaucracy means more inclusion in public life and easy access to service. And this brings to the point, why now? Well, we have observed a very long story about AI. It was launched in the 50s last century, and now it has gained momentum because of different reasons that I pictured here as the progress in algorithms for data representation and learning, culture from companies of highly curated, valuable, and stored data. Of course, we now have computer machinery very fast. They can process quickly the algorithms and the data that we have collected. And most importantly, AI has penetrated all houses. Even people who don't know the technicalities of AI know at least the concept of artificial intelligence. The rule of thumb, anyway, just to bring us to the reality, is that AI nowadays can automate tasks that would require a second of thought by a human being, not more. And actually, AI has limitations. We know, we observe those limitations when generating something new, not yet created by a person, by a human being. And this is because it cannot learn autonomously without having experiences of a given action. At the end, this is a summary that usually provides a vision about AI according to what is AI now and what can be the future. So AI now is very narrow tasks, and this is what we call the ANI. The future might be general intelligence, but we are a long path from a long way from reaching the general intelligence. So now, going back to the points of this round table, AI can tell us what a domain expert, so a human being, expert of the domain, can tell ourselves, and link more information that we can actually do, and certainly being at disposal anytime. So it's quite relentlessly in the way how it computes and provides answers. And just to conclude, whenever we think about AI as a solution, and this is the vision from an innovator or user, I usually try to think an AI that it can be implemented or can reach a particular objective only if that AI can answer these three questions, namely, can I or a domain expert solve the problem in the first place in a few seconds of thought? Do I have the necessary information sources at disposal? And do I have a clear idea of the expected output? If for these questions the answer is yes, then of course we can go towards the vision of bringing more evidences. But of course, this will fasten the way how we can become better humans, because we can bring more evidences, reason further, and eventually also make more aware choices. I want to conclude here my presentation. I give back the talking to Francesco.
Congratulations. And now the floor goes to Heritiana, Professor Heritiana Ranaivoson from the Free University of Brussels, also a member of the advisory board of the MESOC project. I'm curious to hear your point of view on this discussion. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Francesco, for the introduction, and thanks everybody, I mean the whole MESOC team, for inviting me here. Really glad to, because I'm really interested in the topics the project is dealing with. Well, because as I assume I share with everybody here, it's a very important topic. We all believe in the importance of culture and the role that cultural policies can play in that. And we want to know about the social impact. But maybe more personally, because I'm always interested in anything dealing with measurements applied to the cultural creative sectors. If it is measuring innovation, measuring diversity, and then in today's presentation, I really learned a lot, not only about the updates of the project, but some of the things that the speakers said, like for some reason I overlooked before the UNESCO Cultural 2030 indicators. Really glad I will delve into it in the coming days. Now what I'm going to focus more about, well, AI, well, you probably knew it before this session, but as you could see here, it's quite a broad term. It's even broader if you think in terms of the issues, the field that this set of technologies can deal with. And what I think, well, what is more interesting for me is the way that AI can be used to give meaning to huge amounts of content. And I also think that's actually also where AI is the most interesting for MESOC, so that's useful in that sense. So that means, yeah, how can you use artificial intelligence in huge sets of content, not only huge, but diverse, which means with items that are very different one from another. Yeah, how can you handle this content, as Giuseppe said before? How can you give meaning using AI? Well, it was really nice to see how it's being done now in MESOC. Let me give you a personal example. I'm now in a research project called Trendify, where we develop software for journalists, editorial staff, to help them writing articles that will be new and different. For that, we do three main things based on AI softwares. The first one is identify emerging trends, for example, that are not or not so much present in the news. The other one is that we qualify the main opinions expressed about these trends and where they are expressed, which news, for example, or on which social media. And then we see which content is trending in the sense of which ones receive the most interaction. The role of my team in that project is more of social scientists. So in two places, we try to see, okay, how tools can be best designed to take the professional's point of view into account, and then to assess, well, the impact on the readers. Well, there is, of course, a role in there, and I want to directly link to what you do in MESOC with that, because we see that as a decision supporting tool here. So not designing AI tool to replace the journalists, to write the articles instead of them, but to help them, telling them, look, you could write about this topic, or maybe more to the editorial staff, look, you can discuss with your journalists whether you should talk about this topic, whether this opinion is maybe a bit missing, is there a valid reason for that, or should it be in the summary of, in the table of content of your next edition of your newspaper. And then more generally, because AI can be used then to really identify what people think, and their opinions about the important topics for them. I think it's a nice example of how AI can be used to identify or build participatory approaches. As I don't want to be longer than my time, So the name of the session is about the question that AI raises. And well, it's in this example, but I think it's this here. I'm going to broaden a little bit to cover a bit more what MESOC does in general. And I can think about three main questions. Sorry, not really. I don't really have the answers. I think each could take a 2-hour lecture easily, but I would like to throw them. And then if there is a bit of time, I can maybe come back to some of these. The first question is the question of who owns the data. With then related question of privacy, possibly of personal data. Well, everybody has in mind, of course, the GDPR in this view. The second question is the question, and I think the word was a bit missing now, until now. The second question, the question of the biases. So any kind of imbalances of misrepresentation of reality. So AI in general, you have three phases in that. You have data to train your model, you have the algorithm itself, the prediction algorithm itself, and then you build models out of that. And you can have biases, of course, in the way the algorithm is written, but also in data that you use. And for example, in MESOC, well, probably you already thought about this, but well, it was too obvious for you, so you didn't put it in the presentation, or I missed that. I was a bit wondering, okay, for example, how do you take into account the different languages? Don't you have a risk of biasing toward, of course, English, but maybe there are other biases I don't think of. And the last one, but maybe less important in this case, because I've insisted about it, is the question more generally of can AI replace professionals? So journalists in my examples before, but here, can it replace cultural policymakers? Can it replace researchers?
Thank you so much, Heritiana. And now I ask Annalisa Cicerchia from the Italian Statistical Institute, ISTAT, and also the University of Tor Vergata, if I'm not mistaken, in Rome. Please, the floor is yours.
So thank you all for the invitation and for the enormous amount of ideas and suggestions, data, questions. So it's a very, very rich day. So first of all, I wanted to thank you a lot. I also want to tell you that I'm glad to take part. I'm also in the board of MESOC, but I'm in the team of Roma 3 for another Horizon 2020 project that is called SOFIA, Social Platform for Holistic Heritage Impact Assessment. So it is a relative view. The aim of the project is to promote collective reflection on the impact assessment and quality of interventions on European historical environment and cultural heritage at urban level. So it is more focused on cultural heritage, but is very similar. Is a very similar area of questions. Now, I will try, I will profit a lot of the things that have been said so far, and I would like to start from a definition of impact. I mean, especially in the cultural field, we have two different approaches to define what an impact is. Often, impact is intended as a sort of unknown change that we need to discover ex post. And we approach impact with an idea of discovering, guessing, revealing, etc., something that we have no precise idea about and we try to discover. And an alternative approach to impact is a deliberate change, a change that orients, inspires our actions or programs or interventions. Both ideas are very relevant in the cultural sector and in the cultural field. But we must also consider that we have a long tradition that in a way echoes the environmental impact assessment, where in the cultural field, we have developed quite a lot of negative approaches. For for a long time, also the official sources have intended impact as something negative, something that produces unwanted changes in, say, the cultural heritage, for instance, or that intervenes in a violent way in a integrated cultural community, if we accept culture also in the intangible and anthropological sense. Now, I think that and many of the preceding speakers have related in a way the question of impact, artificial intelligence and the cultural sector to the idea of choice and responsibility. And I think this is one of the most interesting points that we can touch. Because I think we must enhance the ability of conceive impacts as desirable changes, and so something that we have the capability, the strength, and the responsibility to describe, to anticipate, and to build. This is the case, for instance, in an area of impact that I'm very interested in developing, and that is the area of the impacts on well-being and health of people, where we have increasingly clarified what are the desirable effects. But if we speak in general terms, and if we also add the contribution of the artificial intelligence, we must, I think, cope with the problem of choice and related responsibilities about the targets, like what kind of impact we have in mind. And I think otherwise we have a similar risk to that we have with the so-called evidence as base for decision. There is the risk that in a way we try to replace data or evidence, to think to data and evidence as a substitute for decision and choice. I think instead that if we adopt a proper strategic perspective, the new application of the artificial intelligence may be extremely promising, and of course we have probably a long tradition in the area of documenting, management, also protection and restoring, and presenting the cultural heritage to the public, for instance. But I think that if we adopt a strategic perspective, I think we realize that the users come to have really a key role. And of course, the complex part in that new relationship is not only the AI part, it's also the users part, because we need to have clear ideas of what we think or what we choose as the needs of the users to be met and to be satisfied. In this sense, I think that, of course, the opportunities, the possibilities are immense, and I think how museums' narratives may be enormously expanded and given extraordinary power. Of course, we can make not only cultural heritage, but cultural in general more accessible, more understandable. We can tailor it to the needs, to the existing knowledge to the attitude and to expectation of the public. And of course, the potentialities are really, really enormous. But I think that the technical possibilities needs to be matched with a strong strategic emphasis on what are the expected goals and, in other terms, what is the impact we have in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Annalisa. It's 4:45, so we have to shorten a bit our second round. Before going there, I would like to come back to Pierluigi for two reasons. First, to ask him about any impression regarding this talk that we have had, and second, to send him a few messages in terms of what shocked me from his presentation and also from some of the talks that I have heard. Going back to the brain, to the human brain, to make it a target for exploration and analysis of impacts is something that shocked me. But also in a more positive way, the connections with context that were in your speech, context as it makes like a bridge between stimuli and reactions, and then a lot of comments received from the panelists on the importance of going back to the outputs of human actions to understand in different ways, including analyzing texts and outputs in general, to understand more of what can be then packaged and become a feedback to the human brain, as you were mentioning before. I'm attracted by this approach, but I would like to hear your comments first and then make another question to all panelists, given the short time left. Please, Luigi.
Yeah, so I will be very brief because time is really running. Now, I mean, there was such a diverse and extremely stimulating range of comments that it would be simply unfair to just casually pick them up. But I would simply add the one line that could also be interesting, I think, for future reasoning. I was stressing so much the predictive dimension that is at the basis of this new notion of impact. But think of how this prediction approach is deployed today in the use of AI in content markets. Think of Netflix or think of Spotify. So what's happening is basically that they are using your behavior to predict what are your future tastes. And so in some sense, self-implementing the idea that your choice represents your preferences. So this kind of approach is really generating a sort of no surprise kind of ecology in which, let's say, people curiosity is getting a bit simplified and trivialized, I could say, to some extent. After a while, I mean, there is a moment in which, for example, Spotify lets you learn about new music that really fits your taste that you initially didn't consider. But after a while, I mean, this really freezes you into a certain type of states that you yourself sometimes can be completely puzzled about, and you would like to disrupt as much as you can by choosing something completely, let's say, unthinkable on the basis of what Spotify is prescribing to you at a certain moment. What do I mean by this? I mean that this prediction loop, insofar as AI is used in such a prescriptive way, in some sense, to tell you this is what you are, and this is how you should, let's say, like music or not, or movies or not. If brought, in some sense, if you brought it to its extreme consequences, is basically destroying the very idea that Jess was hinting at the beginning of creativity as the driver, in particular of a fully powered AI society, which is also inclusive and favoring human development. So what I'm saying is that this pervasive scenario in which AI really, I mean, plays a major role in the organization and functioning of our content platforms is also a very serious challenge to the very idea that I outlined at the beginning, in terms of the predictive nature of human cognition and emotion and inference, because in some sense, this loops into ourselves. So we have to understand what kind of AI do we want from this point of view, because this could really make a big, big difference.
Thank you, Pierluigi, also for being brief. My question is close to that. We have this title of this session, what are the questions to ask? It is my impression that across the discussion today, we are sort of developing a parallel between human brain and artificial brain, with currently at least the tendency of considering human brain as the subject or the object rather than subject, the object of analysis, and artificial brain like the superpower enabling to do things with what the human brain does and what the outputs of this activity are. But there is a problem that you also touched, Pierluigi, when you spoke about explainability, that we quite often don't know exactly how this artificial brain works. So my question for all the panelists is, what kinds of protection systems can we figure out to be sure that the right questions are posed by us to a person, an artificial person, that can not only explain to us the answer, the meaning of what the machine is telling us, but also the reasoning behind, the way the machine went to those conclusions. What kind of protection do we have currently, and what can we do better in that regard?
May I start, Francesco?
Go.
So far, I want to demystify the concept of we don't know what's going on. A neural net is basically an addition of several regression lines, and the way how they are computed, it much depends on the objective function that we define, and this is much of, about the task, and it depends, of course, by the input data. So in order to, let's say, take a short answer to your question, even though it could, of course, be discussed largely, I would say we start defining a clear task that can be accomplished by a human being. And we start from this clear task to collect some human experiences that are, as much as possible, clear without further biases. That's my take on it.
Thank you.
Can I say something?
Please.
Yeah, I think that's indeed, for me, that's the most, or one of the most important questions that relates to many things that were said before. Indeed, Pierluigi raised the importance of the challenges rather of the lack of transparency beforehand. And Annalisa also in her presentation said something about the fact that the data, evidence, or I don't know, AI could not be a substitute for choice and decision. And I think, well, I'm going to say something very simple that should then be explained for a long time, but basically the most important at this part to avoid or to protect a little bit is to enforce as much as possible transparency. Because although this is very simple in the end, what is underlying, if you have a completely black box around what the algorithms that are used or the data that are fed into the algorithms or the models that's a result of that, and it's just simply impossible to really understand what is going on in there, and can lead to very dangerous then decisions or choices.
Others?
May I?
Please.
I think the real question is, are we allowed to ask questions? Manuel Castells once said that technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. And I think the point is that most of artificial intelligence until recently has been funded within a profit if not military or financial speculation, trying to make a profit. Amazon and Spotify do that because they want to make money. And we are now in a situation, going again back to the discourse of this morning, or from what Annalisa was saying, of responsibility. So, and this shift from profit to purpose. Now, how can we do that? We cannot start all over again. We cannot pretend that it wasn't the Pentagon at the beginning funding all of this, because those algorithms are so deeply in the thing, we're never going to get them out. I think the key is to adopt an approach of learning, a Socratic model of learning, where we see too much deep learning, too much machine learning. We see no Socratic learning. We need debate. We need to treat an AI machine as a peer and have a conversation and a discussion where either could be wrong, where we both learn from each other.
Annalisa.
Yes, I think we have these two things before us. On the one side, the capability of predicting, adapting, and understanding, like the Pierluigi example of Spotify. Now, I can anticipate that you belong to that cluster, so probably you have those tests. I think they are extremely interesting in taking care of needs, knowledge, resources, and capabilities of people that are usually excluded from cultural participation. Because remember that in many cases, they are addressed as the visitors, nothing else. And the discourse, the narratives that many places, I have in mind museums, but in some cases, the same can be said of some forms of theater. And so it's not only museums. The discourse is absolutely blind to their capabilities, their characteristics. So in that sense, I think the idea of predicting, adapting, and sort of molding on their characteristics is super fine. On the other hand, I see the same risk in statistics, where we are so fascinated by the mean value, the average value, because we tend to reproduce always the same mediocrity. And in a way, we sort of react badly against novelty, change, creativity. So in that case, it is important to educate the artificial intelligence to disrupt, to be not so much predicted, to enlarge, to surprise. And I think if we instruct in that direction, we could also, reach fantastic results in the field of cultural engagement and cultural participation, and to fight exclusion and to fight exclusion. That's all.
Thank you, Annalisa. And now, Sanda, to conclude.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for the very nice ideas. And I noted a lot of time during your speeches because I understand that we are on the same side. I heard several times biases, emotions, things like that. First question is, do we have data to analyze this data? No, we don't. So this can be possible if we have some data collection platform to collect the data of behavior, of biases, and how visitors are now personalized in their behaviors. So this part is not going to be solved in this project, because this is not project about it, but it's a really relevant question. And then we can go toward the Netflix and the recommenders and so on. So this was partially my reflection onto this. And the second really important thought was in Giuseppe's talk. I really loved your last slide, where you said I is going to be capable to do things as an expert does. And what I have a background in computer science and artificial intelligence, and measuring the culture or art is a completely virgin ground for me. So I have no background in that. So I learned really a lot during this project. And I loved in your talk the part when you say software can do only as good as expert does. So I really nodded on this one. And please do have in mind that here we are dealing with the published texts. And we can extract from published text only as much as was written in it. So this is the only, so our data is the textual data. So I wanted to put that into perspective. We cannot do beyond the available data that we have. Now, thank you, now you are nodding. Here we will have to be able to solve a lot of actually unstructured data processing. And yes, I loved also the cognitive perspective, because in my slide, I also went toward the knowledge graph, or automatically construction, some knowledge representation of the domain, which can maybe useful for developing further tools into domain. So now I will leave the mic to Francesco to wrap up. So thank you very much. It was really good and helpful discussion.
Thanks to all of you. There is nothing I can add, just inviting you, unless you have done this already, as panelists, to use the chat box to add links to projects that you were mentioning. Also, Luigi, the project with La Sapienza, it may be interesting to quote here to the benefits of our participants. What I can only say at the very end, quoting an American politician, is the famous or infamous phrase that says that there are things we know that we know, things we know that we don't know, and unfortunately also things that we don't know that we don't know. And I'm afraid that this domain here, the artificial intelligence domain, may force us to push the ball forward, while there are still very many things that we don't know that we don't know. And with that, I would like to say thanks to all the many participants in this panel, which weren't discouraged by the esotericism of the topic. Thank you and have a good afternoon.